to take over. Let me give you a little bit of biographical information about Teresa Moyer. She is an archaeologist in the archaeology program at the National Park Service's Washington office, where she started as a NCPE intern many moons ago. In the meantime, she has been a historian, a museum guide, collections cataloger, and a bunch of other jobs in cultural resources, in addition to an archaeologist. And here's your screen.
Hi, everybody. Julie, thanks for having us here today. I'm going to give you all a kind of a broad overview of what archaeology looks like across the National Park Service. If I can forward here. There we go. So the NPS Archaeology Program is the name for both where I work here in DC at the Washington office, as well as the overarching umbrella term for all archaeological activities that take place across the Park Service and with our partners. Archaeology on the ground or underwater happens primarily in parks for the Park Service responsibilities, but is also coordinated and undertaken by archaeologists in regional offices and centers. There are also a number of partnership and community assistance programs like the National Register or the National Historic Landmarks Program or the American Battlefield Protection Program that have to do with archaeology, not on Park Service lands, but working with our partners, nonprofit partners and community members to preserve archaeological places. The office where I work also coordinates the Federal Archaeology Program, and the NPS Chief Archaeologist is also the consulting archaeologist for the Department of the Interior. And the Federal Archaeology Program reaches throughout the federal government. It's just coordinated by the Park Service, and it's a privilege that we have. So it coordinates throughout the federal government to any bureau with land managing responsibilities to which land-based laws apply, such as the National Historic Preservation Act or the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. And together we aim to address issues across public lands to create a consistent and coordinated archaeological management resource preservation effort. And when you think about archaeology in the National Park Service, what might come to mind first is a scene like this of archaeologists in someplace remote and dusty who are working in the field. But excavation is actually a small part of an archaeologist's total workload, but it's how we learn about the location of sites and find artifacts related to the past histories of people and places. And some people do work in big landscapey places, but they also work in cities, suburban areas, and underwater. Much of the archaeology on Park Service lands is conducted to comply with Section 106 and Section 110 of the National Historic Preservation Act. In general, we tend not to do research for research's sake. We don't just say, like, I feel like excavating today, let me just choose a place. But we do it in response to activities that might affect archaeological resources, like if a visitor center is being built. Or we do it so that we know what we have and where it is so that we know to take care of it, like when we're doing an archaeological survey across a park. We also do archaeology in response to an issue, like if a river's changing course is eroding features from its shoreline. Archaeologists also get out there to record evidence of looting or vandalism because these are incidents that are prosecutable under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, and we work with law enforcement closely on that. Some of the biggest issues we have are surveying whole parks to know where archaeological resources are, monitoring those sites for impacts, and completing reports and research in ways that make the resulting information digestible to people who aren't archaeologists, so getting it out to you. What you see in the field is just a start. As a result of excavations, parks are responsible for writing reports, curating artifacts, and getting the word out about what they find. The work also helps other cultural resources fields, like if you're a historian or a landscape specialist, to understand what they're caring for, what the full scope of these places are that we're protecting. And after an excavation, artifacts head to curation, and some of you are probably doing museum internships. Curation and museum work is a huge part of archaeology, and there are facilities across the US. Sometimes in parks, sometimes at the regional level, sometimes housed in universities or other storage areas. And all these places care for Park Service collections. But in addition to prepping artifacts for storage, archaeologists in museum facilities conduct conservation work. They provide research space to those using archaeological collections for projects, and they figure out artifacts to send for exhibits or photographs and interpretive materials. Archaeologists in curatorial facilities also address the federal government's responsibilities under NAGPRA, and they provide access to Native American and descendant communities to artifacts associated with their ancestral heritage. And part of their job is to make sure that these things, even though they're in storage, that they are still part of, that they're still the public's resource, that people can still access them and use them and research them and appreciate them and feel a connection to their heritage as a result of these archaeological materials. And while we have these amazing archaeological collections, we're also faced with a curation crisis in archaeology. Our closets are stuffed full and we can't KonMari them legally, and they're expensive to maintain. So in response, archaeologists are using technologies in the field to avoid excavation, to avoid taking in artifacts. And they're also considering ways to appropriately downsize through deaccessioning existing collections without impairing their overall value. Part of what we do as NPS archaeologists, and this is super fun because kids are cute, is create ways for the public to find out about and learn about what we've discovered. So we work with interpreters in parks to integrate archaeological findings into exhibits, into park publications, into ranger tours, into the overall scheme of a park's interpretive events and themes. This is how we get the word out about what NPS archaeology is, what it's about, and how it benefits everyone. And archaeologists also work in education, especially with grade school kids, but really kids of all ages. What we want to do is harness interest in archaeology and use archaeology as a way to teach history and science. But we also use archaeology as a vehicle to learn different perspectives on the past. We can use it to encourage tolerance or to engage people in caring about other people's histories, so they have an idea what it takes to be a good steward of public lands and of their communities and of other people's feelings. Some of these programs take places in parks where kids might participate in make-believe archaeological activities or the real thing, sometimes in schools. We also have a number of online web offerings, lesson plans for teachers, activities for teachers. In the pandemic, a number of things have come up online that kids can do. There's also several junior ranger programs in parks and at the Washington level and the regional level. Archaeologists also work directly with communities who are invested in Park Service lands and the histories on them. These include descendants, the neighborhoods and communities around parks, park visitors, and people whose heritage directly ties to the stories we know through archaeology and that we tell in parks. These relationships are partly bound in law, whereby archaeologists consult with descendant and affiliated groups as part of a project's process. But these relationships are also about ensuring that work done on public lands benefits all people. Again, this idea of not hiding it away, but making our work transparent and accessible to anybody who might want to learn about the past. And so these relationships can, as a result, take many forms. So for example, at African Burial Grounds, Sand Creek Massacre, or Manzanar, these are examples of parks where archaeologists work closely with descendant communities. And for these three places, archaeology provided a medium for groups to work together to share information and to share why these places were significant. Archaeology provided the physical evidence to document difficult history, and this collaboration ensured that the history would not be avoided or forgotten, but could teach future generations about these parts of the nation's past that you can't deny exist, in part because archaeology is hard physical evidence that it happened. Other programs like youth employment programs employ young people from communities around national parks to conduct archaeological activities that enhance the relevance of park archaeology. And sometimes that relevance is a summer job, a good summer job, a fun summer job, a summer job that you learn something. But these programs also aim to diversify how we look at the stories we tell and who tells them, because the people who are coming into our parks to work have stories and have a perspective that people who work for the Park Service may not have. So part of the aim is to ensure that the next generation of archaeologists reflects our population's demographics in the United States, but also that it ensures that when archaeologists are asking questions, they're asking questions that represent all people and all people throughout our history. So when I give these presentations, I like to give kind of a ever-changing list of critical issues, current issues, things to think about. And so these are some of the things that we've been talking about a lot this past year. And 2020 has been wild. And archaeology is evolving, and National Park Service archaeologists are trying to change with it to be more effective managers of the nation's archaeological heritage. And some of that is just the never-ending quest to know where all the archaeological sites are. Once we know where things are, we can monitor their condition over time. And that helps us to know how our landscapes are changing, when we might need to intervene, but then also just to kind of know when we can step in to be useful to make sure that these resources are preserved for perpetuity. We also have to curate the artifacts, which is leading to that curation crisis that I mentioned earlier. So archaeologists are thinking about ways to reduce collections when appropriate, or even collect less when they're out in the field. Another major issue is climate change. Archaeological resources provide an interdisciplinary research tool about past peoples and ecosystems. So climate researchers can use archaeological materials in their research. But we also need to manage archaeological resources threatened by climate change, whether it's a heaving coastline or a sinking coastline or changing extreme weather patterns. Archaeological resources are uniquely fragile in the face of climate change. Another thing about climate change that is interesting is that it provides an opportunity for federal land managers and communities to coordinate and collaborate and talk about loss. And what happens when these things that we've been charged to take care of because they are part of who we are, what do we do when we're faced with them being lost? How do we deal with that? Given the extent of work that we have to do, archaeologists are also using new technologies so that we don't excavate as much, that we're not disturbing the soil as much. And these non-invasive technologies map what's underground and map resources in 3D so we can document where they are and what they are. And it's becoming an increasingly important part of how we do our inventory and monitoring work. Archaeologists are helping to diversify the park's storytelling. Archaeologists often find evidence of people who are not known well in other ways or who haven't been included in a park's dominant story. And so we're helping parks to discover new perspectives and offer ways to learn from the past about conditions in the present, how we got to be where we are now. Given a number of recent national events, parks are also seeing an increase in vandalism and looting, including of archaeological resources. And this is an ongoing issue. It's part of why the Park Service exists, is vandalism and looting. And it's troubling in any number of ways, but it underscores the need to engage the public to help the Park Service manage resources. Because we're seeing individuals take archaeological resources for their own hobbies and for their own interests and for their own collections, when actually these resources belong to us all. And so with that, this presentation has just been a slice of what archaeology looks like for the National Park Service. It's constantly challenging, it's constantly changing, and it's also constantly rewarding. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me by email. I can also put you in touch with the other people in the archaeology program with other questions you might have. Thank you.
Oh, Teresa, thank you so much. There's so much great information there that really provides a lot of food for thought. One of my questions is there a hesitation on the Park Service's part to tell people where archaeological sites are located because of the vandalism issue or theft of archaeological pieces? I mean, how widespread is that information?
So that information is sensitive data and it is tightly controlled.
Mm-hmm.
There are some places, like if you go to Mesa Verde, there's archaeology, you know, every 100% across the park. And then in other parks, you wouldn't know unless somebody pointed it out to you. One of the responsibilities of archaeologists is to keep that sensitive data quiet and under control, and the access is tightly controlled. Providing that data can also constitute a violation of the Archaeological Resources Protection Act.
Mm-hmm.
That's how important it is.
Yeah.
So it sort of depends. Like if you want your law enforcement rangers to know how to help you protect archaeological resources, you sort of have to give a general wave of where they are so they know where a violation might occur. Archaeologists, when they work with interpreters, can also do things like sort of broadly gesture to an archaeological site so that people don't know exactly where it is, but they know the general setting. Or they will slightly turn a sign one way or the other so it's not quite pointing at the site. Mm-hmm. Yes, protecting that locational data is an essential protection practice of archaeologists.
Interesting. And can I also ask the question that Kathleen got about deaccessioning? Under what circumstances is that done?
So that is a question I think better put to Kathleen. It sort of depends, and we're also working across the federal government on 36 CFR 79, which are deaccession regulations. The Park Service has its own deaccession regulations, and the answer is that it just sort of depends. I think when people look at a box full of rusty nails that have seized into one big lump, things like that are taking up space may seem like low-hanging fruit for deaccessioning, but it really just depends on what their archaeological value is and what their context is. It's a complex process.
Mm-hmm. Good answer. Thank you so much, Teresa. That was really great, really informative. I appreciate it. Now